Hello YouTube, welcome to my channel again. My name is Emilio Suarez, and in this time I want to kind of create a conversation and give you an exercise, okay? And I'm always doing this kind of exercises where I see a movie or a TV series or whatever, and then I start asking myself questions about certain aspects of the movie or the story, of course. What I want to talk today about is something that I've been watching my whole life, but I kind of saw it a couple of months ago and I've been thinking about it, and I said to myself, why don't you talk about it on YouTube? And can be a great exercise for your story, or to include in your story, or just to practice writing. And it's that moment when most of the movies and TV series, we have this conversation between characters, usually two people, but can be more, it doesn't matter. But it's usually two, where there's a character that is telling a story of his past, and we don't see that story, we don't see the flashbacks, we just hear it. And I've been asking myself, why is that? Because you probably have listened to this, where they tell you in video you're not supposed to be talking too much, you're supposed to show more than just talking. And yes, that's kind of obvious because it's video, we want to look at things, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to show everything, because I think that can create a bad habit of doing things because it's what everybody else does, and we don't ask ourselves questions. Why is that? Can I kind of break that rule? Because I don't think there are rules. I think there's some kind of a nature to stories, but you can, once you understand them, you can do whatever you want and use it as a device for your own stories. So I've been thinking, why those scenes exist and why sometimes we don't bother about them, like being talky and not showing us what really happened, or showing us that moment specific. I think, I'm not pretty sure, I don't like to think a lot about what was the writer thinking. I do that because I'm a writer, and it's inevitable to just put myself into the mind of the writer. But I have to ask myself, more than why the writer wrote it that way, why it's affecting me in a specific way, because I'm the audience, okay? You cannot know what every other person in the audience is gonna think about. You just have yourself, and you have to use yourself as an instrument to see how it's gonna play out with the audience. So before I talk about why I think that works in my head in a certain specific way, let me just give you a couple of examples of what I'm talking about. I'm talking about those moments where there are usually two characters, and one character is telling a story of himself. It's usually something that's been bothering the character, okay? Usually, not always. And examples of that, I can think about Die Hard. Die Hard has this moment where John McClane is talking to the police officer who's outside, and they have this moment of buddy relationship. They just met by phone, and they only talk by phone in all the madness that is happening. And when John McClane is telling the police officer how he feels about what's going on and how his relationship is with his ex-wife, the officer tells him kind of his story, because he's trying to explain why he is not working in a specific way. Like maybe he is not a person who trusts his gun or his instincts of shooting a lot. And what he says is that he shot a kid by accident, and that has been a scar that that character has been carrying out And of course, it's gonna be a payoff of that in the movie if you haven't seen the movie. I'm supposed to say spoilers, but that movie was so long ago anyway. But that's an example. There's examples in a lot of movies, and I cannot remember a bunch of them, and TV series. But there's another movie that I really remember now, and it's Pulp Fiction. In Pulp Fiction, when the character of Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta are talking in the car about the travels and how in other countries eat French fries with mayo instead of ketchup and all of that, it's all talky, and we just think, oh, that's so interesting, it's funny, that's why we kind of engage with it. So there's that talky moment. They're telling stories about what happened. Another example is in that great series, The Leftovers. If you haven't seen The Leftovers, it's only 3 seasons on HBO. It's an HBO series. Go watch it. You're gonna love it. Anyway, in the last episode, there's a conversation between the two protagonists, the guy and the woman, and there's a telling of something that happened. I don't want to spoil that because that's more recent, and we just listen to it. But at least for me, all those moments in all those pieces that I just told you got to me. It's not because it was just good, very good written or very good acting, but it got to me. It got me inside of the heads of the characters, and why it works without showing me what they are telling, because it's also inevitable for me sometimes think like, I would love to see that, I would love to see that moment. And after that, after I listen, after I go inside the head of the character, I just don't want to, because I think it works better that way. And I think it's because of this. You show things instead of saying when you are in the mind of the person who's telling the story, okay? And it's tricky because usually the person who's telling the story is the person who's the protagonist of the moment, okay? That's the main point of view. But we, the audience, act as the other character, as the character that is listening to that story. That character haven't seen that story, so that character has to imagine that story, and the character has to make a choice if he or she wants to believe it or not, depending on the reactions of the person who's telling the story. I think that's why it works. I think that's what we are supposed to do when we write those scenes. We write those scenes, yes, to make people feel something, but in a structural way, in a way that we write screenplays, I think we have to try to convince the person that we're telling the story and be as honest as we can, or maybe as liars we can if we want to. But another thing is, we don't need to see the past, because what we are seeing is the present of the character with that scar, with that experience. Who's that character now in the story? That's why it works that way. That's why it works by just telling and not showing. When you show certain aspects like those kind of stories, it just puts you in a way that maybe, I don't know, maybe you are in the minds of the person who's telling the story and in the minds of the other characters that are going to appear in that flashback. And you can do that, of course, but that depends if that's some information that you want to give your audience only, or that's information that the character is telling to the other characters because they are having a conversation. So in a conversation, you have to say things and the other person has to listen to them and imagine them, like when you're reading a book. Okay, that's real life for us when people tell us stories and we try to imagine what was that or what was it like. And I think it's a great exercise for us to do, to write a scene where there's a character telling the story of himself, of something that's bothering him or some experience that he has. It doesn't really need to be so tragic. It can be funny, like the scenes in Pulp Fiction. But those scenes show us what kind of characters are those, because the person who's receiving the information is reacting to that, so you understand how is that character, because the first one is telling the story, this anecdote, and it's telling how he feels about it, and they create a conflict of friendship or something like that, where they're just having an argument. And it's really interesting. It's something that I haven't heard about this before. Maybe there's a bunch of videos on YouTube or writings on the internet somewhere, but I usually like to think how I feel when I see it, so I can ask questions. And that's one of the most important things about creating stories, not only writing but just being storytellers. You have to ask questions. Why am I doing this? Why this character is doing this, or why this character is saying that, or why that character is showing us, the audience, that. Because when we see the flashback, for me, I think about the director tried to give me the information, not the character. But maybe because I do movies, so I think in that way. Maybe you don't, and if you don't, that's great. And I get involved, of course, with stories, but try to do that. Try to write a scene. Maybe you're writing a story already and you don't have a scene like that, or if you have a scene like that, maybe you can rethink it with this that I just told you and rewrite it, if this makes sense to you, of course. And let me know what you think about this. If you think I'm right, you think I'm wrong, if you have an argument about it, or if you maybe think that happens for some other reason. I would love to know that. And I'm gonna continue doing this also because I think it's interesting. Pick those little pieces and just stay away from how do you write a first act and all of that, because there's a bunch of places where you can find that, but there's not a lot of places where you can find something like, why is that affecting me, or why I think the story is doing to give me that information. And we ask questions and we try to answer them, because that's what we do when we write stories. We create problems and then we have to resolve those problems. So I hope you have liked this video, but I think it's packed with a lot of information. So let me know, please subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, or give it a thumbs up if you like it, and let me know what other films or TV series or whatever have you seen where you see this and affects you in a certain way, and why you think that happened. If you think it's something very recent, just put a spoiler alert just in case, and watch those movies that I just mentioned you, the Pulp Fiction, Die Hard, and look for the series The Leftovers. They're great movies and series. So I'll see you later. Gracias, YouTube.